of the Star and Crescent Report will bring to you CIA Intelligence Director for former Vice President and President George H. Bush and Ronald Reagan. We're getting ready to call them now on the line, so brothers and sisters, bear with me 1 second as we...
Hello?
Mr. McGovern?
Yes.
How are you doing today? This is Rashid on the Star and Crescent Report.
Hey, Rashid, how you doing?
I'm all right. We're live on the air, and I wanted you to just tell the audience a little bit about yourself before we get started in the show.
Okay. I understand you're broadcasting from New York, and that's my hometown. Born in the Bronx, educated there. Went into the Army, came down to Washington, finished my Army service, and went into the CIA as an analyst. That's sort of a glorified academic who was given all the information on Soviet foreign policy in my case, and asked to figure it out and tell the president what's going on. That was good duty. That was very different from the duty that most people associate with the CIA, which is overthrowing governments and doing other things like that. That's the other CIA. I worked in the analysis group, which is really what President Truman envisaged as the CIA when he created it way back in 1947. Retired a couple decades ago and still work in the inner city of Washington in the Adams Morgan part. But around 2000, I saw that my profession of intelligence analysis had been kind of, what's the word? Well, corrupted is one word. I'd say prostituted. The president wanted to do a war in Iraq. And he told the head of the CIA, look, I need you guys to fabricate some really, really scary stuff so that we can, quote, justify, end quote, this war. To my horror, that's what my old friends did. Now, these were the analysis people, not the operations. So they weren't really used to telling a whole bunch of lies, but they did. So what I did, and what some of my colleagues did, was formed a little movement called Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. We started publishing, we did 3 memoranda before the war, telling the president this was a cockamamie scheme. It was based on manufactured intelligence, and you really ought to prevent what seemed to us even then as the unintended consequence of a catastrophe in the Middle East. We're not real happy that we were right, but at least we take some professional pride in our attempt to tell the president precisely what has eventuated. So that's a thumbnail sketch. I write, I speak, I interview, as I am doing now, and I try to spread some truth around. And the last thing I'll say is probably the most important, and that is when I go back up to New York and see all my very highly educated friends and tell them what's going on in the world, they look at me incredulously and say, no, Iran's a big threat. You saying Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon 12 years ago? Come on, Ray, that's not in the New York Times. So that's sort of like a mini example. My point is simply this, that I've been down here in Washington for 52 years now. And so I've seen you see a lot of change in 52 years, but the biggest change by far, the most important change, is that we no longer have, in any real sense, a free media. And that could not be bigger because the American people, unless they watch or unless they listen to programs like yours, Rashid, they will have a prayer of them finding out what's really going on. So we do what we can do. We tell as much truth as we can spread around, but as you probably have seen, the major media have blacklisted us. They don't want to hear the truth, especially if it goes against the grain of what their owners, what their corporate owners want, and that is to sell more military equipment. Peace is really bad for business, Rashid. War, tension, man, that's really sells a lot of weaponry. So it's that simple, and it's really kind of a struggle, but we carry on, and we're delighted to talk to people like your audience.
I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the situation that's now unfolding in the Middle East, and where do you think it will lead us, and what hand do you believe that America had in this ISIL or ISIS or whatever? Once it was Al-Qaeda, then it was something else, and they just keep changing the names to suit the military-industrial complex. But what do you think is actually going on between America and Russia, and where do you see this leading down the road?
Yeah. Well, yesterday there was a major agreement signed on to by both presidents, that is Obama and President Putin in Russia. And it was a ceasefire agreement. And they're saying, look, isn't it enough to have millions of refugees? Isn't it enough to have hundreds of thousands of people killed? Stop it. We got to stop it now. And we agree. We agree that we can stop it because we've had experts meeting in Geneva for a couple of weeks, and they've figured out how we go about monitoring airstrikes on various terrorist organizations or people that really aren't terrorist organizations. So what happens here is that they both pledged to build on the progress that they've made together in the past. And one of the things that President Putin mentioned is back in 2013, you may remember late summer, there was a scare that had President Obama just about to press the button to let the missiles fly into Syria. It was a false flag operation. And long story short, someone persuaded Obama a year before to say, okay, well, the Syrian people are really bad. Bashar al-Assad has got to go, but we're not going to do anything unless he crosses our red line, and that red line is the use or even the movement of the chemical weapons that he possesses. Okay, now guess what? Somebody uses sarin, one of those chemical weapons, outside of Damascus on the 21st of August, 2013. Immediately, John Kerry, the Israelis, the Turks, everybody is up in arms. They Bashar al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad. The president of Syria did this, and now since he crossed our president's red line, that's it. We got to retaliate, or else we lose all credibility, right? Well, Obama, whether he realized it or not, was being mousetrapped. And luckily, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, had enough guts to go tell the president, look, Secretary Kerry, he may be a diplomat, but he's not really a strategic thinker. I mean, sure, he served in Vietnam, but driving boats up the Mekong, that really doesn't qualify you to be a military strategic thinker. So, what you need to know, Mr. President, is what I've just learned from my British colleagues, and that is that the sarin gas, the chemicals used during that attack outside Damascus on August 21st, that was not the same kind of sarin that is found in the Syrian army stocks. It was homemade. And we have that verified by the British who have put it through their laboratories. It was homemade. And so, Mr. President, it's going to be really difficult when people find out that it wasn't Bashar al-Assad that fired that sarin. It was somebody else. And we've since learned that it was the Turkish intelligence service that facilitated the transit of sarin down to where it was shot from. So what happened? Dempsey goes to the president that evening, the same evening after John Kerry had said 35 times, I counted them, 35 times, that the government in Damascus was responsible for the sarin attack, and so we have to attack, right? Dempsey goes to the president that night and says, Mr. President, here's what we learned from the British. And besides, Mr. President, it was also transparent. This attack took place just 2 days after UN inspectors arrived in Damascus, okay? And they've agreed to look into this, but they don't get back for a couple of days. And this way, Mr. President, when they do get back, they're going to ask me, General Dempsey, why could you not have waited just 2 days to hear what the UN inspectors had to say? And I'm going to have to say, it beats the hell out of me. Go ask the president. Now, I think Dempsey may have not said that so starkly, but in any event, the president got up just 20 hours after Kerry said it was all but inevitable that we'd attack Syria. And he said in his first words in the Rose Garden, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has assured me that our forces are in place to attack Syria, but we don't have to do it today or tomorrow or this next week or this month, that there is, quote, no time sensitivity, end quote, attached to this. And so I'm going to go ask Congress for appropriate authorization. Wow, that's stunned everyone, especially the French, who had their fighter bombers on the warming up on the tarmac. The Israelis, who had their air defenses, as tight as they could make them. The button was not pushed. Now, why do I mention all that? Well, because it was Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, who pulled our president's chestnuts out of the fire. How did he do that? Well, he told the president, look, we've been talking to the Syrians, and we have this working group going. We think we can get the Syrians to destroy all their chemical weapons. So what do you think? And Obama says, you can? And Putin said, watch me. Next day, Syrian foreign minister gets up and says, we have agreed to destroy all our chemical weapons. They're going to be put on U.S. ships, specially outfitted for such destruction. End of chemical weapons story. Now, that's the background, okay? That's 2.5 years ago now. What I'm saying is that what Putin said yesterday was that during that crucial time, when we together were able to prevent an overt attack on Syria by the United States, we need to be able to do that again. And this time, we've gotten together with Kerry and Lavrov, the foreign minister, and we've worked out a deal, and President Putin and President Obama have signed off on it. This is the best hope that we can end this terrible war in Syria. Now, people kind of poor-mouth what happened. Oh, the Russians are big. The Russians will never live up to it, all that kind of stuff. But I went on TV just, 15 minutes after Putin made his little declaration and told us what was going on. We also had reports about what the agreement said. And they said, look, this is a major step forward or help end another war. And they said, is it going to be that easy? And I said, no, it's not going to be easy. But the fly in the ointment, well, there are 4 flies in the ointment, okay? One is Turkey, one is Saudi Arabia, one is Qatar, and the other is Israel. All of those are so-called, quote, allies, end quote, of the United States, and all of them have the power and the ability to sabotage this agreement. So unless the United States can lean very hard on these guys, which Obama has shown himself unwilling to do so far, unless we can show a little guts and say, look, knock it off. We know what you're doing. We know you're supplying, financing. We know you're arming these rebels. Knock it off. Unless Obama's able to do that and make that stick, well, the thing's going to fall apart, as most people are now predicting. What I predict is that Kerry and Obama will face into this just as they faced into the opposition to the nuclear accord with Iran. I think Obama's got 1 year left. Well, he might as well do something good here, and stopping the carnage, stopping the destruction of Syria and its people is certainly a good thing to do before he leaves office.
Well, do you think that if the agreement falls apart, do you believe that Vladimir Putin can allow America another regime change, especially in Syria, and something that is so close to Russian strategic interests without getting involved militarily? Do you believe that because Russia has two military bases in Syria, naval bases, and that is their gateway outside of the Black Sea, and for them to lose those bases, they would be hemmed in to the Black Sea, part of what Zbigniew Brzezinski talked about in his book, the Grand Chessboard, and talking about surrounding Russia and breaking away Kiev and Ukraine away from Russia to prevent it from becoming a rising power. Do you think that these moves in Syria are part of that? And if the agreement falls apart and America does attack, where would this put America and Russia?
Well, those are really good questions, Steffi. They're the right ones. Let me put it this way. You talk about regime change, and it's a really nice sort of software thing.
Government overthrow.
Yeah. When I joined the CIA, we used to talk about overthrowing governments, and of course that's what regime change is. Now, the people who are specialists in this, and the people who are the politicians that really favor this kind of thing, like, for example, the Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, her name is Victoria Nuland. You probably saw her on the public square there in Kiev handing out chocolate chip cookies to get the energy level up there. So, long story short, Rishi, that was one regime change too many. That was right on the doorstep of Russia. And anyone who didn't know that Russia would act very forcefully, particularly if the new cats that come in, are already named beforehand on YouTube, okay? And the first thing they say is, let's join NATO. Now, if anybody didn't know that the Russians would annex or reincorporate Crimea, well, they shouldn't be in any kind of policy-making or intelligence role because they don't know diddly about Russian interests. It's okay for Victoria Nuland not to respect Russian national interests. It's not okay for the arms guys and the other people who plan these covert actions or regime overthrow. Not only that, but that was spearheaded. That regime change was spearheaded by proto-Nazi forces. And they're not even subject to they're not even able to be influenced by the corrupt regime in Kiev. Now they're sort of a power to themselves, and they're people who, cooperated with the Third Reich, actually did some of the bidding of Hitler, not too long ago, 70 years ago. So these people are in bad repute even within Ukraine. And that's the story in Ukraine. Okay, so one regime change too far. Now, with respect to Syria, you're right. And there's two naval bases there, one big one. There are airfields now. And the Russians were watching this evolve over 3.5 years, right? And they see not only that the thing is getting worse and worse, but, and this is important, this is different from the way the U.S. has to look at this. The Russians have real problems with terrorists, from Chechnya, from Dagestan, from Central Asia, from above the Caucasus there. They fought a major war with Chechnya. Okay, now thousands of Russian minority types that don't like Russia or Moscow have been trained, equipped, paid by the Saudis, by the Omanis, by the Qataris, by the Turks, and they're learning all kinds of skills that they will bring back to Russia. And this is a strategic threat to Russia, and Putin has tried to make that clear to Obama by saying, look, you got an ocean between you and these guys. We don't. We got a border. And they're being trained. This is really serious stuff. So what happened was this. The Russians are looking on and seeing that the U.S. half-hearted attack against ISIS or ISIL or Daesh or whatever you want to call it, not making any progress at all. And they're seeing that some of these terrorists, real ones, to endanger actually the Syrian regime, that is Bashar al-Assad. And so the Russians say, if that happens, who's going to take over? ISIS? And who's going to train all these people to come back into Russia? It's going to be bedlam. And so, besides, we have this cordial relationship with Damascus. They give us the rights to this naval thing. And so, at the UN, on the 28th of September this past year, Putin asked to meet with Obama. They spent an hour and a half together. And I don't know, I wasn't a fly on the wall there, but what eventuated from that, Rashid, is clear what they talked about. What Putin said, now, Mr. President, with all due respect, your forces are not making an awful lot of progress in attacking ISIS. I don't know why that is, but they're not. Mr. President, as I've tried to explain to you before, this is a national security threat to us, given the fact that all these terrorists are going to come back into Russia. And so, Mr. President, we just want to let you know ahead of time, in 2 days, all the fighter aircraft, bomber aircraft, and also missiles that we have put into Syria, as you know, over the last couple of weeks, we're going to use them. It's going to start on the 30th of September, and we just hope that you will react in a sensible way, because what I will do is instruct my Foreign Minister Lavrov. I hope that you will instruct Secretary of State Kerry to work this thing out. We have planes flying over the same territory now. First thing we need to do is deconflict them so they don't wind up shooting each other down or bumping into each other. So that's my first suggestion, and then we can work it out from there. Now, to his credit, against all this stuff he takes from hardline folks here in Washington, mostly the neocons, Obama said, okay, and he told Kerry, work it out with Lavrov. Now, that was October of last year. The way it's worked out is that they did get people around the table. They do have this serious support group, and Lavrov and Kerry are the co-chairs. And yesterday, this reached fruition in a very significant ceasefire agreement, which I concede is going to be very, very hard to implement. But at least you've got not only Lavrov and Kerry, you've got Putin and Obama behind this thing. And as I said before, I think, well, I didn't say this, but I'll say this now, Putin has a lot more leverage, a lot more influence over Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and over what Iran does, and over what Iraq does even, and what Hezbollah does. Much more leverage than the U.S. has shown itself willing to exert on Saudi Arabia, on Turkey, on Qatar, or on Israel. Now, people say, I'm really confused about U.S. policy in that part of the world. It doesn't make any sense. The U.S. is supporting these so-called moderate rebels, but then the president says that this is a fantasy. And people need to know that President Obama said on the 10th of August, 2014, that the notion of moderate rebels in Syria is, quote, a fantasy, end quote. So all of a sudden, I guess like Lazarus, they were raised from the dead, and now we talk about moderate rebels. Okay. So what I'm saying here is that this is the kind of thing that's got to stop.